You're welcome back. This Newsfile is your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And I have thoroughly enjoyed the discussion so far. And also the, like Kojo says, the solution-oriented nature of the discussion prompted by the Commission and the President. And my guests have been Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director of the CDD Ghana, Martin Pebu is a lawyer, Dennis J. Jomo is a lawyer, and Kojo Opon Kroma, Minister for Information. Of course, he's also a lawyer. MP for Fasia. Of course, that's the number one currency going into 2020. You know. Okay, right. So there have been a few issues that have come out of the GNPC. We'd like to look at them briefly and then go to the state of the nation. And the matters that have come out of GNPC is that it appears that the CEO and the board chair, Freddie Blay and KK Sapong, are on some, theft tussle, and one ordering the other to do one thing or not to do one thing because of procurement matters. And the PIAC, the Public Accountability Entity, has been talking about this and suggesting that if care is not taken, things will go really bad. And then aside that, there is the $43 million set aside for corporate social responsibility, which the ASEP says is so wrong, and the minority in parliament also disagrees. Let's listen to Ato Forsing of the minority in parliament, and then Dr. Steve Manteaw of the PIAC.
It looks like under this particular government, in fact, previous government have also done the same, but it looks like the whole problem in terms of politicization of a national commercial entity as strategic as GNPC has been compounded under this government, to the extent that in some respects it appears to me that GNPC is being treated as an extension of the MPP bureaucracy. I think this sends wrong signals in terms of the expectation of the international community to depoliticize GNPC and allow it to operate as a purely commercial entity. 2020 elections will see a lot of quasi-fiscal expenditures being undertaken by GNPC through its foundation, all ostensibly to influence the outcome of the 2020 elections. Then I'm worried that if you're not careful, Ghana will not reap the full benefits of its discovery of oil in commercial quantities. A lot of it will be squandered through GNPC and the abuses that we are seeing now.
Okay, so that's the blunt speaking Dr. Steve Manteaw. So what's your analysis of what is going on, Martin, at the GNPC? What's your analysis of what is going on? Before this came out, we heard of the tussle between the chairman of the board and the CEO, and the letters have all been in the public domain.
Yes, it's very unfortunate. To be candid, the allocation raises a lot of concern. Yes, it raises a lot of concern because, look, it's public knowledge that the GNPC is behind its obligations when it comes to the ENI project, the gas infrastructure project. They are behind the obligations. So if you haven't paid for the gas infrastructure, government had to step in. How do you find money, such a colossal sum, for
corporate social responsibility? What's wrong with that? Corporate social responsibility. You give to society, and that's what they are seeking to do. What's wrong with that? Why are we up
that would be putting the cart before the horse. Yeah, classical case of putting the cart before the horse. Because you must first engage in your mandate. Yeah, I was just looking at the Art 64, the GNPC law. Yeah. You say they must do exploration, production, all that. So you must first produce, earn income, And then you can do charity.
They haven't told you they have problems in that area.
No, it's public knowledge that GNPC is behind in its obligations in the ENI gas infrastructure project. So when you haven't paid money, you are not able to pay money for your core business, how are you able to get money for CSR? Okay? No, how are you able to get money? So you see that then it raises suspicion that it's a slush fund to be used for political patronage. That is it. And you see, this particular thing raises an issue of Parliament's complexity. You see, Parliament is complicit in this. How did they approve this budget? Where was Parliament looking? I thought there's a committee that specifically scrutinizes before the House itself approves. So it tells you that our parliamentarians were sleeping. Yes, it raises an issue against Parliament itself. So, I mean, this brings to for the question again, that how much are we watching Parliament? Because it shouldn't be done. You can't abandon your core mandate and go after charity. I mean, how? That's certainly a recipe for bankruptcy. You must first produce. It's when you finish producing, then you can engage in charity. So with this, we highly suspect that this fund is meant to do political patronage. It's a slush fund. So
Steve Manteaw, of course, knows these things a lot.
Yeah.
When it comes to say this, how do you want us to take him? And the ASEP, who have done a whole analysis and put the document out, you know, they say among other things that the CRC budget of the GNPC in 2019 represents 2819%, 270%, 240%, 629% of the capital budget of the Ministries of Justice and Attorney General, Energy, Agriculture, Finance, and Finance respectively. They say that in relation to the total budget of the mentioned ministries, those four, GNPC CSR budget represents 210%, 254%, and 47%, and 65% respectively. They show that this is unconscionable.
I think, Samson, for us to be able to look at this issue from a more contextual point of view, we need to first look at the creature that brought about this GNPC, which is PND's Law 64. We need to understand what are its objects. If we look at it, and the object that they are supposed to pursue is in line with their budget, then there will be no need for us to, condemn it. Apart from that, because where most of us are coming from is looking at the practice, where a company comes up, a corporation or a company comes up with its budget, and upon its budget, in terms of use operations.
Martin has suggested that this is already approved. It's not approved yet.
It's not approved yet.
It's not approved.
It's not approved yet. I know Parliament are
They are actually campaigning for Parliament not to approve it.
So there's an instance where people look at the practice. If this was your normal company, would you make your CSR budget more than your operations budget? Because a company or a corporation is also formed to make profit. And if you look at the PNDC Law 64, when profit is made, when profit is made, payment into consolidated fund. On approval of the Minister of the annual profit and loss account, the surplus remaining after provision for taxes and reserve fund established under Section 18 has been made shall be transferred into a consolidated fund. So when profits are made, it has to go into the consolidated fund. So it is not a carte blanche that the fact that you're a corporation, you can decide to set it up and decide to do anything with a CSR, because ordinarily private companies, because remember that GNPC is part of those statutory agencies that was converted to private companies under the Statutory Conversion Act. And so ordinarily, you will not have an instance where companies, when they sit to make their budget, will have a CSR component. So I think that although it might be for a good purpose, it might be seeing how best they are using to supplement the effort of government in terms of actualizing certain objective. In terms of practice, you will not see an instance where the CSR component of a budget is more than the operations budget. In any event, if there's more money to spend, there is an instance which goes to the profit of the state. The law says that the minister should approve it and it should go into the consolidated fund. Now, apart from this, the second issue relating to GNPC relate to the impasse between, the managing director of and the chairman of the board. And it's something which is quite intriguing, because looking at the letters, it is something that you realize that what the chairman is, it must be resolved. But if you look at the content of the law, what the chairman did might not be especially if the facts that the CEO presents are correct. Because when it comes to meetings with regards to, GNPC, it's governed by law. And this is not of the board, this is not governed by the company's code. Remember that there's a special legislation that actually takes account of GNPC. And if you look at the law, meetings of the board is set out in section 7 of PND's law 64. And it says that the meetings of the board shall be held at the time and place determined by the chairman, but the board shall meet at least once in every month. The meetings of the board shall be held on written notice to members, and the notice shall state the agenda for the meeting. And remember that as part of the board of directors, the managing director of the corporation is part. So if you have the managing director of the company saying in the first paragraph of his letter to the chairman that you wrote a memo to the CFO without letting me know, you hardly organized a board meeting without me being present, quite clearly the due process of the law that ought to have been followed by the board was not done when they purported to have done that. But I think that this goes to the point, how do we go about it? I think that the shareholders should call both the board chairman and the managing director of the corporation. And because remember that the ultimate beneficiary of the profit of GNPC will lie with Ghanaians. And the state holds it in trust for us. So the president should be able to resolve the matter.
Right, let's deal with it very briefly so we can move on to the state of the nation. Yes, Prof.
So I think both issues, one, the feud, so to speak, between the board chair and the CEO, as well as this CSR palaver, I think reflects, for me, it's a bit puzzling and disappointing at the same time that 60 years or so after our experience with state-owned enterprises and its politicization and we really haven't come to a point where we appear to have learned any lessons, right? These are not new things. Now, on the CSR thing, I have raised questions in the past as to why state-owned enterprises must do CSR at all. Now, I'm not for zero CSR by state-owned enterprises. The state is their shareholder, but they have other stakeholders that are critical and important to their profitability and their operations. So if you operate in a community, you need to have some social license to be able to work within the community. They support your work. Your employees, beyond just paying their salaries, if you want to do something for their health and well-being and the well-being of their families, that's also fine. We've had, companies set up hospitals and clinics for their staff. That's all part of CSR. That's fine. But where you get to a point where this whole area appears to be unregulated, where a state-owned enterprise essentially can use public resources, this is really taxpayer money, to say we are going to spend twice what we spend on capital expenditure on corporate social responsibility. Now that raises red flags for me, because GNPC is supposed to really evolve into an operating company, a national oil company that actually does the work that currently we bring in foreign companies to do. It must also have the capacity to be an operating company, exploring, drilling, doing these things. They are not there yet. As Martin rightly said, you are not there yet. And yet, you find it expedient to use monies you should be using to build your capacity to a point where you are an operating company to be doing so-called CSR. Some of which, in terms of even the breakdown of, what this CSR consists of is also another question. And I think Martin is entirely correct here, that you must do well first before you start doing good.
Okay.
So India, for example, has this law that mandates that private companies must spend 2%, right, of their after-tax profit or whatever on CSR. But in that law, it defines a certain threshold, net worth threshold. You must be a company that generates this amount of volume and revenue, that makes this amount of profit, that has this kind of net worth, before that law applies to you. So you must do well first. and then you can do good. And in that law, they also define the parameters of what's acceptable CSR. So I think we need to get to a point where we regulate this practice. Otherwise, what we'll end up with is a situation, as ASEP describes, where an impoverished, struggling parent who takes trotro to the hospital gives money to the dependent teen, who then spends that money to fly to London to watch a Man U game. This is essentially what we're doing here, where the state itself appears to be, we have a sovereign that is struggling, has little fiscal space.
Right.
After paying salaries and servicing our debts, there's very little money left. And yet it has a dependent child who is giving money from our oil resources and is deciding that I'm going to, lavish it on these projects.
Okay.
So I think we have a legitimate question there.
Let's hear
on the board matter.
Okay.
On the board matter, again, I think that this is not new, but we are getting to a point in our corporate governance culture in the state-owned enterprises where we are beginning to see board chairs and CEOs seeing each other as rivals for supremacy in terms of who controls the company, who really is the boss here. Now, when you...
And it's all got to do with money, procurement.
Well, it's clear that, the board chair, just general corporate governance practice, when you are a board chair, the board chair acting alone, except in terms of like calling meetings and stuff like that, the board chair acting alone outside of the board doesn't really have that much power. Ordinarily, the board chair, you preside over the meetings, you call meetings, but without board having sat and decided things, you alone, you are not vested with power to intrude into the running of the company.
Okay.
That is established principle. And in fact, I also saw some interesting provision in the Constitution. Article 285, which is Code of Conduct for Public Officers, says no person shall be appointed or act as chairman of the governing board of a state corporation or authority or public corporation or authority while he holds a position in the service of that corporation or authority. This is a clear constitutional policy that frowns on the notion of executive chairman, that when you are a chairman of the board, you ought not at the same time have a managerial, operational role in the company. That's essentially what it is saying.
Except in the case of the Bank of Ghana.
Okay, so there's a clear exception there. But this principle, right? When you apply this principle across the board, you will see that the culture where we have board chairs trying to vie for supremacy with CEOs runs up against this constitutional policy, which says, look, we don't want executive chairs. You are the chair of the board. The CEO is the boss of the company. They have reporting obligations to you. You also have a fiduciary obligation to your shareholders to monitor and oversee the operations of the company. I think where the politics complicates this clear separation of powers and division of labor is that both CEO and board chair, as well as all the board members in this case, owe their appointment and tenure to one person, right? So if, for example, the board comes to a conclusion that the CEO is managing the company not in the best interest of the company, what are they to do? They cannot fire this person because it's really the president who does that. So in a tussle like that between the two, it's whichever one can marshal the most political resources and influence with the president, who is their common patron, is the one who appears would prevail. I think we ought to be able to start thinking, just as we are looking for solutions to other problems, we ought to start to begin to think about undoing this structure of corporate governance in our state-owned enterprises, where we begin to move towards a more competitive, meritocratic way of selecting the CEOs so that we follow a certain order. The president appoints the board, but the board constitutes a committee that properly looks at applicants for this office, choose them, engage them by contract, can review their jobs, so that there's a real clear definition of these things. State-owned enterprises are not going to go away anytime soon. China has them all over the place. They are hugely profitable in other places. They run well. They can be made to run in this environment, but not in this kind of culture where politics essentially complicates the picture.
Interesting.
And I think it came up in the Francis Essien matter.
That's very revealing. Thank you very much, Prof. Now, let's listen to the minority and what they had to say, Ato Forcing, what they had to say about this, and ask Kojo Opon Nkrumah whether there is any explanation for a company wanting to do. You said they should do. Is it do well before you do good?
Yes.
Do well before you do good. A company wanting to do good before it does well.
In the last energy sector levies report that was laid before Parliament, they used part of the money for the purposes of paying for pension. Pension, misapplication of fund, clear misapplication of fund. If I'm paying something, you are supposed to use it to do something, and you are using it to pay for pension, and you are telling me that you are going to borrow 250 million for the purposes of other expenditure in the energy sector. Unacceptable. This should not be allowed to go. Apart from the kind of expenditure going on, they are going to spend like $1 million Ghana cedis to buy equipment for a private hospital, Focus, and other ones. I mean, if you look at some of the expenditure here, they are GNPC is behaving as if they are a real estate company. They are going to renovate Redco, Bangalore 2, Bangalore Days Hospital. Is it an energy sector, a real estate company? I don't know what they are doing. Corporate social responsibility budget. They are spending grand total $43.5 million US. And look at some of the things they are going to do. They are going to pay for Dr. Bawumia's drone, 1 million. They are going to equipment for Department of Surgery at Kolebu, 0.82 million. It means 820,000. Health campaign, sanitation, environmental campaign.
It looks like this particular government.
All right, so could you help us if there's some explanation from the government, the shareholder?
I think, Samson, first of all, we will all agree to the principle that the work program of the GNPC must be scrutinized. Not just the GNPC, but all of these other state agencies that don't necessarily appear in the National Fiscal Account or the budget. But I'm happy to note that unlike what was happening previously, where you see the work program come to Parliament sometimes in September, October, by which time they've executed about 9 months of what has not been approved, and it comes for perfunctory approval. Today, under this administration, we have shifted from that. And right in the very first quarter of the year, the work program, the minister and the agency are instructed to make it available so that Parliament can scrutinize. So it is in concordance with that view that we should scrutinize. That is how come even today we are seized with this in Parliament, and that analysis is going. And I think that in itself is something we should comment. I don't share the view that politics associated with some strategic state-owned enterprises is necessarily an evil thing. And let me explain to you why, especially in the case of GNPC. Oil is a huge part of our economy. And oil and the political policy directions that we must take in that industry are matters that the government and the political administration of the state is interested in. Sure. About a decade ago or more, or perhaps even a bit more, my very good senior man I respect very much, Mr. Chachu Chikata, was chief executive of GNPC. And because of the alignment that was required between him and his administration and the administration of the day, they went in a particular direction on how to fund the GNPC, engage in other economic activities, some of which later became the subject of court matters, etc. That was political policy direction, and you need that alignment
the NPP as an
between the administration
as the opposition
and
criticized the GNPC for losing its focus.
Yes, because we thought that the political policy direction was wrong. Fast forward 2001, 2002, John Ajikun Kufuor president appoints Moses Odro Boateng as managing director of GNPC, and a new political policy direction is adopted. We always argue that particularly, and if you read E.O. Owusu's books and the history of Jubilee, you find that the new political policy direction that we adopted contributed significantly in trying previously untested technology in discovering the Jubilee field. So the political alignment is required, and that's why I don't share Mr. Manteaw's argument that it is politicization. No. Now let's come to a few specifics of this particular works program, which thankfully is in Parliament in the first quarter of the year, unlike previously. This claim that the GNPC is spending 43 million on CSR and less on its core mandate is not true.
Capital expenditure.
It is not true. You see, what they have done is that they have picked 43 million for CSR and have picked what needs to be spent in the Voltaire Basin which is 20 million. And I've sought to suggest that, therefore, they are doing what is nice but not what is necessary. But the oil-related expenditure of GNPC is over 250 million. Check the works program. It's over 250 million. They are spending money on ACA, on ENI, on Exxon, on many of the other oil-related activities. It only so happens that the Voltane Basin is still at the exploratory stage. So they don't need, as part of their share, to spend more than 20. Why should they be spending more than 20 when they are not required to pump more than 20? But put together their total oil-related expenditure and answer the question whether they are doing what is necessary before what is nice, or they are doing what is nice before what is necessary. And I think that while we all encourage the scrutiny, I always want to argue that dig up the numbers so that the analysis is well structured. Now, why are they spending 43 million on CSR? Especially if you look in the context of, take it as their financials. What is their balance sheet size? What is their total expenditure size? Okay, they are spending 43 million. This year, we are informed, and the GNPC, as part of the memo they have brought to Parliament, is explaining that, again, unlike previously where you found a lot of their CSR activities concentrated in one area of the country, and because we have been calling for the fact that we want to see across the oil industry, the oil resources permeate, they have taken a decision to extend their activities in the three areas, in the areas of education, social amenities and economic empowerment, training people on skills development, etc. They have decided to extend it across the country. It's one of the reasons for which you see a jump this year. Are we interrogating it? Is it valid? Is it not valid? Is it the same as, for example, in previous years where you saw GNPC and oil-related money being used for what they call capacity building, which capacity building you could not exactly trace? Or today, for example, are you finding today? Yeah, all sorts of things. Today you are finding classroom blocks, water facilities, social amenities.
I am not suggesting that those days there was no accountability. Maybe some gaps here and there.
No, but there was a significant question as to what, for example, that huge chunk, I don't have those figures here, that huge chunk that went into what they call capacity building, what it was used for. I'm sure we all recall that.
People were giving scholarships to go study.
A lot more than that. A lot more than that. But here's my point. The big and the good news is that we have an opportunity in Parliament to have an analysis or scrutiny of the work program and answer these questions really, whether they are spending more on CSR than oil-related expenditure, or whether they are spending more on oil-related expenditure and meeting their obligations, and perhaps, let's say, the standard fractions that you would expect on CSR. And then very quickly, it is not a fact that we are behind our, or we are defaulting on our ENI payments. No, that's not a fact. We have a disagreement with ENI on the obligations that have accrued. Those that we have agreed on, we have settled. We have a disagreement on the obligations that have accrued. And as and when we complete that, and indeed in this works program, you will find part of the cost centers that will be used to settle that obligation once it's settled on. So I think that one must also be cleared.
Okay. So let me check this quickly. Alex Mould is the former GNPC boss. He joins us on the line. Thank you very much for joining us. Clarify for us, is it the case that GNPC was one of the state enterprises that was turned into a company? And what do you say about Kojo's assertion that, unlike previously, the work program comes in September after what, a chunk of the amount had already been spent? Hello, Mr. Mould?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, you heard my question?
No, I didn't hear the question. Can you please repeat it?
Please respond to Kojo Opong's assertion that, unlike previously, the works program comes in September after a chunk of the money had already been spent. So you come for perfunctory, as it were, approval. Rubber stamping Parliament does.
Well, I don't know exactly what year he's talking about specifically, but I know specifically that since 2013, when I got there, the work program is always presented to Parliament before the end of the year. Whether Parliament actually approves it in September is another issue. But the work program has to be brought to Parliament before November, because our budget is approved by the board most times in November. So by December, we present it to Parliament. So that is a fact. I don't know whether he has a specific year he's talking about, or whether he was there when it happened, but this is an untruth.
Okay.
So that is the first correction. There was another correction I would like to make. Somebody earlier had mentioned that GNPC had been turned into a company, as many of the other SOEs like the oil refinery and co. Unfortunately, GNPC never was granted that dispensation to be made a company, and I really wish they had. But for some reason, GNPC was not made a company. So I just wanted to correct that as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Alex Mould is former CEO of the GNPC. Thank you.
Yes. So I think Kojo makes an important point about the need for political policy alignment between a strategic state asset such as GNPC and government. And I think I concede, I think most people will concede that. The question is, how does this play out in the corporate governance structure? The board is there for that. So political policy alignment, the government, you have your board there, but there is no need in terms of that alignment. That alignment is not destroyed when you leave the board to be in charge of, say, doing recruitment and selection of the CEO, regulating the tenure through a contract, performance contract, and those things. Okay. You can still have that policy alignment because the board then becomes the one that you are looking to ensure that you have a CEO whose idea and vision for the organization is aligned with the government's purposes. So we must separate this issue of political policy alignment when we say that politics is intruding in the effective running of a state organization. We're not saying that politics must disappear. Okay. We say at what level is politics more appropriate and at what level is politics not appropriate in the running of a state enterprise.
Thank you. Could you conclude in 2 minutes? We'll take a final break.
A question for you
please ask the question because you're about asking it.
About the works program. On the CSR side, does it include a breakdown of what it is intended?
It does indeed. You heard my good friend Atuforsen purport to list. You have a total works program of about 860 million.
No.
If
on
you
the CSR side?
Yes. On the CSR side, there's a breakdown. So you can examine that, and that's the purpose of the scrutiny. You can examine that and make a determination whether these CSR projects are useful or are not useful in any case. But the total works program is about 860 million. Oil related.
No, but as Professor Dr. Manteaw, suggests, which the minority seem to also project, it is the case that it is for political benefit that at this point in time you spend so much to do certain projects in certain areas so that it rubs in and helps the campaign.
You want to, first of all, this is not an election year. Last year was not an election year. The GNPC has been engaging in CSR last year and in this year as well. You want to examine the specifics. Are you going to look at it and come up with an analysis that says that, and let me be very blunt, that these projects appear to have been concentrated around, let's say, the Ashanti region and the Eastern region, and therefore it gives credence to a certain political suspicion? Or are you going to find a wide, equitable dispersion of the, because the objective, as I've mentioned, is to ensure that unlike previously, where you had a good concentration, or literally a good chunk of this amount spent in the areas that were closest to the oil programs. Now you're having a widespread. Indeed, this morning, the GNPC team is in Yendi, where as part of the recent resolution of the matters there, and as part of efforts to, kick back development, they have embarked on CSR projects, the water projects, education projects, etc. Yendi is not, may I say, the hotbed of any political party for you to necessarily say that it is because of politics. So my point is that you want to examine the specifics. Let's not do this thing where people get away with sweeping comments. Let's examine them.
Among the specifics,
yes.
When it comes to sports, they are talking about construction of 10 artificial soccer turf with floodlighting, wire fencing, and then they just say at item 2, sports. Then they put the figure by 8. Then you have item 3, special community initiative. We don't know what exactly that means. Then there is the economic empowerment, where you have advisory services, skills development, market access, agricultural support, SME support,
Not
Enterprise
sufficient.
Development Center, and the figures are there. So we don't know what that represents.
this is not
Then there is,
exhaustive.
there
This
is
is not
education
exhaustive.
and training.
Yes.
Education and training. You have professional or professorial chairs. Then you have GNPC STEM quiz, STEM Digital
Science,
Academy.
technology.
Right. Then you have local scholarship, 3 cohorts. You
breakdown is
have
there.
foreign scholarship. You have medical Cuba scholarship. You have construction of 50 6-unit classroom blocks for SHS. Then you have supply of 12,000 mono desk for 50 SHS school. Then TVET equipment for schools, construction of 4 dormitories for schools, construction of 4 science laboratories for SHS, construction of UCC Institute of Law and Governance building. You have library project, Kumasi Children's Park, and maybe I'll just mention this and end it there. You have environment and social amenities, purchase
So
of
the details are
ultra-modern
there.
hospital equipment,
The details are there.
you know,
Not
health
sufficient.
facilities.
Oh, but the details are there. The projects are listed, the amounts are put to it.
Some they list the
also,
project, others they are very vague
no,
about.
but that is why it is before Parliament and before a committee of Parliament. Anybody who has further questions, looking for further and better particulars, has the opportunity to inquire and get the details of.
But you
those ones.
agree this is very vague.
No, it does
Agricultural
not.
support.
Initially, initially, we said there were no details. Now we are finding that there are details and amounts, and we are saying it's not sufficient. And I'm saying that it is before a committee of Parliament where, when you want, I am a member of Parliament, when you want further detail, you sit, you can, they will subpoena or they'll just invite the MD and the board. My committee has invited them several times to provide further and better particulars before we go. But it is important to make the point. It is important to make the point that 43 million is not more than a total expenditure of 860 million. It is not more than a capital expenditure of 76 million. Those are factually inaccurate. And I think that those facts must be put in context. We encourage the scrutiny. Let's go there, let's do the scrutiny. If there are things we want to recommend or these ones may not be appropriate, yes, right. But let's not do these blanket statements when the facts don't support. And then finally, my very good friend, Mr. Moult, makes the point that they used to submit their reports before the end of the year. That is true. They used to submit it before the end of the year, but they used to submit it at a time when literally more than half of the works program would have already.
I thought he said they
No,
submit.
no.
They submit, but Parliament
That's not what I'm
works on it
referring
before
to.
the end.
That's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the works program of a particular year. So the 2019 works program
will be submitted.
will be submitted. Sometimes you find around September, October, November. It doesn't mean, no, I'm coming. It doesn't mean that it is submitted before the budget is read, which is the interpretation he was trying to give. The point I'm making is that the work, and Parliament had occasion to complain about it severally. And I don't want it to be a banter between us. You are a very credible news house. Check from the records in Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a minute, because I need to take my break at this point.
That's fine.
Yeah,
That's
just
fine.
a minute. Do a minute.
What I'm saying is that in all of this, GNPC cannot go outside its core mandate as enumerated by the object of the statute.
That is true.
And if you look at the object of the statute, it clearly defines what they can use their money for, even if it relates to CSR. Okay, and I think that we should have that discussion many a time when people are not conscious of what created them, and sometimes in the midst of it they want to do everything. But this is a very special vehicle to the extent that if it's not petroleum related, your object that is mandated by law, you can't go beyond that. And I think that we should look at it from that perspective.
Thank you very much. We take our very final break. We return to see how much commentary we can have or analysis we can have on the State of the Nation address given by the President. We'll be right back.
President completely avoided the talk about the performance of the city. We have never heard the president said the city is depreciating at a low pace. He never talked about it. So he completely avoided it because he knew that the city is depreciating at a faster rate that he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it. And that's why the president didn't even mention it at all in his State of the Nation address. This is something that the president must talk about, because it is very important to the businessman. The president should tell us what he's going to do to arrest the fall of the value of the city. He didn't talk about it. So you don't know. As we speak now, the city is running at over 5 cities, about 5 cities, 28%, 27%. So what will it be at the end of the year, or by the middle of the year? What is the president going to do to ensure that the value is stable, or even the city appreciate? Nothing about that. He has avoided it completely. So I am not impressed. So we will come with a debate on it from Tuesday.
You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, and my guest, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director, the CDD Ghana. Martin Pebu is a lawyer. Dennis J. Jumo is a lawyer. And Kojo Opon Kroma is Minister for Information. And as he says, he is the MP for Ofuasi. Now, there's been a lot of applause for the members of Parliament, particularly the minority, that for once they have comported themselves so well when the president delivered his State of the Nation address. But we have very limited time to deal with the issue of the State of the Nation's address. So let me start with Dennis on this point. What do you make of people saying that the president deliberately didn't talk about the city at all, as you heard James Aveji there? Deliberately didn't talk about the city.
To be fair with the president, I think there are a lot of issues that the president has to always address with regards to the State of the Nation's address. And it's understandable why the opposition will always want an instance, a situation where the area that they think the president is not doing well to come out more in the State of the Nation's address. But even if the president did not address it, I think these are obvious facts that everybody is fully much aware. And for that matter, the president has chosen his speech. The speech writers have written for him. For me, I think what we need to interrogate is the level of consistency in terms of the president's State of the Nation address as he came to power from 2017 to 2018 and now to 2019. And it could clearly reveal that the president has been very consistent. Now, what I was not happy with regards to what the president now addressed is our justice system. And I'm passionate about our justice system. Okay. We have created regions where there are no courts. And because by law, if you want to sue anybody in the High Court, the law requires you to sue the person in the region that the person finds himself. And there is no ordinary resident, and there is no High Court in some of the regions. Okay, so it creates an issue for us. But
I suppose that's work in progress, isn't it?
I know, but so the bigger issue, apart from that, there are serious issue, there are serious issues concerning the justice system, as well as the courts, the number of judges. And there are certain municipalities that don't have district courts. Okay, like to Okoshi Court, as we speak, does not exist. Okay, so these are things that if you look at the justice situation, I think for particular mention, the president, I am of the opinion that in terms of State of the Nation address, the state of our justice system must be melting. And also, we should extend it for regional. I can't have you
speak a bit more than what you have done.
Thank you.
Yes, so Prof, what can you also say briefly about the State of the Nation? And people say we should concentrate on the city, as a Bloomberg reports that city falls to record as foreign investors shun Ghana bonds. And it says Ghana's currency slumped to a record against the dollar after a dovish tilt by the nation's central bank reduced, whatever.
I think the president did what presidents typically do in a State of the Nation address, essentially to paint, to try and be optimistic, to let people feel good, to give them a sense of optimism about the future.
It's supposed to be the state of the nation.
Yes, but in terms of the state of the nation as measured on the street, at the street level, I think the state of the nation, there are pockets of despondency in the system, but I think I would characterize it more as anxious. The state of the nation is one of anxiety. People are anxious about some of the issues we've discussed here. Political violence, violence in politics, where are we headed?
There are those who have complained about he not talking specifically about the security issues, including the girls who have been kidnapped.
Quite a bit of anxiety, around security issues. There's quite a bit of anxiety too, I think, around the economy. And it's not only to do with, the falling value of the CD vis-a-vis certain major international currencies. You know, it's also generally a sense that, you know, while there are these macroeconomic indicators appear to look good and they are improving, that is not translating at a street level. So I would characterize it, if I were to look at it from the point of view of the citizen, that there's quite a bit of anxiety in the system.
Thank you. Martin?
Yeah. I'm excited about the recruitment that will be made into the Ghana Police Service. It's
About 4,000?
Yes, because, you know, we've cried consistently that the numbers are just not up to scratch. You know, there's a benchmark, the UN standard, that we should do 1 policeman to 500 citizens. We're currently doing 1 policeman to over 900 citizens. That's not good, especially in the context of the heightened insecurity and that. So it's good. It's good that they are going to augment the numbers. They should do more.
Thank you very much. Could you?
Yes, Samson, very quickly, a few specifics. Bloomberg initially reported that Ghana's currency had plummeted by about 11%, then they revised it down to 8%. The fact is that it's 4%. I think it's 4.04. And currency is such a delicate matter that if you don't communicate well on it, you set panic into the system. Indeed, part of what has happened in the first 2 months of this year is that as the Bank of Ghana has been adjusting how it reports the reference rate, it has reason to believe that the traders and the banks have been interpreting it as a benchmark rate, and have also therefore done a bit of panic. And I think the idea is to engage better with them so that that panic is quickly resolved. But the traditional issues about supply of currency, reserves, etc., those ones are...
And there are concerns too that the IMF has raised, we understand.
That
about risks and vulnerabilities,
as always they do,
from the exposure
as
to
always
external
they do.
sources of funding.
As always they do. But in this particular instance, the reserves are in good standing. We have a surplus. It is a matter of better coordinating with the banks and the traders. Of course, the president didn't necessarily touch on 100% of the issues on everybody's mind and heart, but he spoke to over 40 different issues on that day. Since 2007, as I started reading State of the Nation addresses and following coverage, there's never been an instance where everybody has said all my issues were addressed. So we understand that. We understand that, and we take it in good faith. But I think the conclusion is what makes the point, that we may have a few challenges, but the state of our nation is healthy.
Thank you very much. Kojo Nkrumah is Minister for Information, MP for Ofuasi, and he's also a lawyer. So, economists? Okay. Dennis Ejay Jumo is a lawyer. Martin Pebu is a lawyer. And both of them are also rights activists. Dennis has been spending some time with the areas that not too many may pay attention, including what affects children. Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh is the executive director of the CDD, that's the Center for Democratic Development. And I am Samson Ladi Anyanini. I've been your host, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much. The news is up next. My outfit, as always, is by Latida. We continue with the extensive coverage of the NDC's primaries that is going on this morning and this afternoon. So keep your dials here and keep your television sets right here on multimedia. You'll get all that you need to know about the primaries that are going on. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.